let's get started. I'm Rayanne Rushing, so welcome to our webinar. Thank you, Andy. 2021 Washington State Energy Code proposed amendments. I'd like to say just a few things before we get started. And so our intention today, we're here to educate and empower you with information, connect you to resources and each other, generally facilitating and maximizing engagement in the building and design and construction industry, government affairs. At Rushing, we believe that an informed and engaged community will provide for the most equitable as well as progressive code development. So this month is our 16-year anniversary for Rushing. This has been our brand from the beginning. I will mention that Scott, myself, and Eric, for the 17 years prior to starting Rushing, we were in code development. So this definitely is our passion. And if you look around the room on the invite list, we have included clients, contractors, code officials, and our competitors. So this is really what we're about and always have been. Our team is going to introduce themselves as they transition to speak in order to save time so we can really focus on this subject matter. I'm going to pass to Todd Thayer, our Chief Operating Officer. Go, Todd.
All right. Thank you, Ann. I'm also going to keep it very quick because our real code experts are coming up, but I want to introduce myself as Todd Thayer. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Rushing, also electrical discipline specific too, but at Rushing though, I'll just, in case anyone, you're here, you're familiar with Rushing, but our in case you don't remember all the things we do, we have world-class experts in mechanical, electrical, plumbing, top-notch world-class lighting design, energy modeling and energy analysis, and sustainability consultants, as well as commissioning services. We do work all over the Western United States. Yep. This Eric, do you want to?
Thanks, Todd. Yeah, I'll jump in here. So Eric Vandermeer with Rushing, a principal here at Rushing. My new title for the year is Chief of Engineering, so I'm trying to focus on our
it's more than the year, Eric. You're always going to be
okay. Well, so yeah, I've been deeply involved with Rushing almost since the beginning, and code development for the last well, I don't know, 15, 20 years in mostly Washington and Seattle. So today we're going to have a brief review of the code development process for Washington State, summary of where we're at in that process and where we're going. We're going to look at some of the significant proposals on the energy code side and look at other things that are trending for policy around the state if we have time at the end. So that's what we're planning on covering today, and we'll jump right into the topics at hand here. So what's driving energy code changes in Washington? We get this question a lot, and we're trying to get the word out there. So over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of legislative mandates. That's what we're trying to meet. So as professionals in the built environment, we are trying to meet the state mandate of achieving an energy code that can have a 70% reduction in net annual energy consumption and also achieve zero fossil fuel greenhouse gas emission homes and buildings by the year 2031. So pretty simple. We all know what we're doing here. It's just getting harder and harder from a code standpoint, obviously, to get there. And, we're tasked with doing that in the most cost-effective way as possible. And that definition of cost effectiveness has changed over the years by the legislature. But pretty much we're able to take into account the social cost of carbon or anything else that we want to meet those goals at this point. So how are we doing on meeting those goals? We're gonna take a look at this. So we're in code cycle 2021 is number 5 here. So we've had 4 code cycles since 2006, and we got 4 more to go. And so we're behind schedule, especially on the commercial buildings, and we've got a lot of work to do. And one of the chief things that's hard with this is that we're trying to save energy for things we can regulate in the energy code and other things that we can't regulate. And so that's a significant challenge in how do you write a code that's going to save, unregulated energy use in buildings. Let's move on to the next slide. As we mentioned, this is both energy and carbon, and the state recently, the legislature has developed a lot of initiatives towards clean energy, and we have clear goals that have been set by the legislature on the carbon side. So that's what we're working towards. So let's go to the next slide. So how are we doing? We're still, at present, our 2018 Washington State Energy Code is one of the few states that's in the deep green color here on the chart. We have a statewide energy code that's equivalent to ASHRAE 90.1 2019. So the 2018 code was developed on ASHRAE 2016. So we're a bit ahead of the rest of the country. And we're currently, working on our 2021 code, which is based on the 2019 code. So we know we're pushing forward faster, and we're seeing a lot of initiatives come through Washington to try to get them either into 90.1 or into the IECC code. So, huge emphasis in Washington with proposals coming in from around the country to move our code forward, to try to move the model codes forward. So with that, where are we at in the actual code development process for Washington State, and what happens next? So we're about halfway through the process. This past last June, code proposals were due to the state. Well, a lot of us spent hundreds of hours in meetings this past summer debating code proposals. The council then reviewed those, and in December they issued what's called a CR 102, which is the public review draft of the code based on all the code proposals that have been submitted. So right now we're in the middle of this public comment process per the state mandate. So last week there was the first public hearing on the code, and next Friday is the second public hearing on the code. So this is the opportunity in the next week, if you want to get involved and say that you love the code or hate the code, or it's not aggressive enough and we need to go faster. This is really your opportunity to jump in and get your voice out. So what happens next? By the council receives public comment, and then they make decisions on what they're going to do. And hopefully by about April of this year, they're hoping to have the Washington State Energy Code commercial code kind of established. After that point, they're also going to be working on the Group 2 codes later this year, and they could make some correlation changes later this year between the codes if needed. So by December 1, the council, per state law, has to pass a code. It then sits through the legislative cycle and goes into effect July 1, 2023. I know, so everybody's thinking, well, it was just like a year ago, Eric, that we adopted the 2018 code. And, a couple months after that, we had to submit code proposals on the 2021 when we only used it for like 3 months. And now you're saying we only have 15 months left with the 2018 code, and we're transitioning already. yeah, that's what's happening here is we had, because of COVID, we had the 2015 code for an extra long time, about it, an extra, what was it, 9 months or something. And so the 2018 code is going to be one of the codes that we have for the shortest amount of time. And we're really, looking to get projects moving if you want them under the 2018 code, because it's not too far off that we're moving to 2021. So what do we got next here? So
I want to jump in really quickly and just also remind everyone, we're talking about the state code. Seattle heavily modifies and amends the state code. That process hasn't started yet. That's going to be happening after this gets finalized, anticipated to go into effect approximately the same time. So just a little reminder that we're talking about the state, but more to come on Seattle and potentially more jurisdictions, right? We've seen Shoreline pass similar amendments for the 2018 code cycle. Other jurisdictions are looking at this and looking at taking a similar approach. So more to come on that. Stay tuned.
yes, thanks, Andy. So quick recap. So this is just the commercial buildings section of the 2021 Energy Code. There was 158 proposals received to the council. 118 proposals were approved. Many of those were modified by the tag. A lot of them, the significant proposals, went through multiple meetings and multiple sidebar stakeholder groups that tried to improve those proposals. And today we're just going to be talking about a few of the significant proposals. There is, on the State Building Code website, there is a preliminary cost benefit analysis for the code, so that if you're looking into diving into that kind of information on specific proposals to understand them better, that information is available. So with that, what is the 2021 code, really demanding of us? Yeah, go ahead and flip forward the slide. The 2018 code requires a pretty integrative design process, which at Rushing, we fill a lot of these different positions on a design team with our services we provide, but it's getting more integrative in the 2021 code. There's going to be more strategizing on how to comply with code and, what kind of design professionals are needed to do that. So you'll probably have some new folks, folks that are specializing in things like offsite renewable energy or renewable energy credits or other things that you might need on your design team to find a way to comply with the new 2021 code if passed as currently the draft is written. So with that, Stephanie is going to talk a little bit about sustainability. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Thanks. So great news is our Washington State Energy Code really does help us with our sustainability efforts across the board. It does focus on energy efficiency, but it does start propping you up for hitting some of your other sustainability targets as a companies. So something that we're also seeing more often is having cities have incentives focusing on third-party protocols like LEED, like Living Building Challenge, to give you additional FAR bonus or additional height to the project. So we're seeing that, of course, with City of Seattle Green Building Standard and Living Building Pilot Program, but we also see it in City of Shoreline, Woodinville, City of Kirkland starting to look at it, and a few other cities like Redmond as well. So you're going to start seeing more and more about LEED, Living Building Challenge, and how can you start leveraging those third-party protocols to get additional FAR and bonuses. So on top of that, operational and embodied carbon, you're starting to also have bigger effects and how it starts going into your environment, social and governance goals. So a lot of third-party financing you can get through by actually going above and beyond just those third-party protocols. And then the last two things I just wanted to mention here on the slide was that climate change, resiliency, and health and wellness are starting to become bigger topics in the sustainability world. Those topics are hours and hours of long of conversation, but you're starting to hear more and more about that. And cities and jurisdictions are starting to look at these folding them in within the requirements for code. So on the next slide, you can see there's so many different protocols out there. We can help you with all of them. We've worked with all of them, and jurisdictions are really evaluating each one of these protocols and see how that best fits with their overarching city goals. So we're here to help. The protocols are long, there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of details there. So stay tuned on how protocols are going to keep on coming up with city incentives. And then with that, we're going to start diving into the changes. So first question that we have out here is natural gas being banned in Washington State? So Reed, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Reed Rushing here, principal with the mechanical group. Yeah, lots of discussion on is gas being banned. And basically, the short answer is what we're seeing in Seattle under the 2018 code. That's being carried to the 2021 Washington State code. So it's not an outright gas ban. It does mandate heat pump heating for space heating, right? So it's not. It's part of the commercial code. It doesn't apply to single family homes or townhomes. It doesn't apply to backup power generation. We can still have gas cooking, and there are some exceptions for electric resistance heating. And then there's new language in the code that differentiates some of these requirements between climate zone 5 and climate zone 4. And so when we talk about heat pump space heating, what systems are allowable? So we're all familiar with a lot of these on the screen: split systems, VRF, PTHPs. Where the big impact comes into play is when we get into water source systems. So water source VRF, heat pumps, hot water, chill water fan coils. The big impact is what used to be a gas boiler are now large air to water heat pumps. And this slide illustrates kind of what that impact is. There's prescriptive sizing under the new codes that, we have to provide the majority of our space heating with these air to water heat pumps. And this is a case study for a 55-story multifamily project, so a large high-rise building. 2018 on the left-hand side, we had a smaller air to water heat pump for some energy modeling efficiency. But now moving to a full heat pump plant, you can see the pretty dramatic space impact up on the roof, and we wouldn't have actually had enough roof on this project for the amount of heat pumps required. So you can imagine, roof coverage impacts, acoustical impacts, obviously cost impacts to be considered. And so that's the main Washington State mechanical direction that we're headed. And I'm going to pass it to Nathan to talk about some of the district energy changes.
Hi, everybody. Nathan Miller with Rushing's Energy Group. This is a pretty exciting slide. I'm not expecting you to read it all. The gist of it, though, is that this is an example where not all changes in the energy code are making things more restrictive. Instead, for example, what we're highlighting here is there's now opportunities to take advantage of connecting buildings to what's being defined as low carbon district energy systems, such as those providing hot water, chilled water, or condenser water, allowing buildings to share energy between them. And then have paths in the code where you can take credit for that and maybe use that credit to make compliance easier in other areas of the design. So it's pretty exciting that this is in there. It's looking at energy use beyond just the footprint of an individual building and helping us really incentivize district designs that are more efficient, multi-building designs that are more efficient.
So Nathan's being too humble here. I mean, this is a Rushing helped sponsor this proposal, worked on it. This is a very innovative idea it's not in any of our model codes. It's not in 90.1. It's not in the WSEC-C. And it's a way that we saw that we could help push buildings forward to have, so we're not just treated as purchased energy from these high efficient, low carbon district energy plants. So this is really an opportunity for us to help not only improve new buildings, but improve existing buildings out on the grid that need to get off of steam systems or other things to be more energy efficient. So it's really an opportunity for low carbon district energy in the state. and it's an exciting exciting thing that we hope gets through the public process here. So.
And if you want a specific example, this would, for example, allow a project that is a net heat rejector, like a data center that is constantly dumping heat, to then get some credit within the energy code for actually connecting to a system and sharing that heat with, say, an adjacent residential building that more often than not is demanding heat.
Specifically, an existing data center building, old downtown Seattle, and a new residential high rise, et cetera, right? Yeah.
So yeah, that like we've heard, there's a lot of changes in the mechanical code. There's a lot of little things that we're not going to talk about today, but we're going to keep plugging through some of the significant changes here. So Stephen's going to talk a little bit about plumbing systems. So Stephen, can we still use gas water heaters?
Thanks, Eric. For those that don't know me, I'm Stephen Huff, manager of the Plumbing and Fire Protection Department here at Rushing. So the short answer here is maybe, or maybe not. There's actually two different options that are being put forward right now regarding water heating for the state of Washington. And actually, Eric, I think you had some fresh intel on what's going on between these two options. Can you tell us a little more?
Sure. So option one is very similar to what we have in our code that allows, high efficiency natural gas boilers. Option, and also has options for heat pump. Not a lot of options for electric resistance heat. Option two, if I said that right. Option two is the more aggressive proposal that's similar to what we have in City of Seattle. And, through the tag process, the energy code tag process, option two was the recommendation from the tag to move forward with. There were minority reports on from a minority position, mostly the natural gas industry, pushing for renewable natural gas as a viable option for the future. And so they're really supporting option one. So the council moved this forward with two options in the public review draft to try to get input on this from stakeholders around the country. Like I said, there is the cost benefit analysis if you want to dive deeper into this, and there has been public comment specifically on this topic. A lot of it's coming from hospitals and other users that don't think they can go to full electric buildings at this point. So Stephen, you want to talk a little bit about specifically what option two entails?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So option two, which is the mandatory heat pumps, is basically going to be following the Seattle rules at this point. So it will be heat pumps for everybody. If you've got residential, R1, R2, or if you're something different, you're going to be required to use heat pumps as a mandatory version for what you're using for your water heating. That's going to basically, technology is going to allow you to use, standard air to water heat pumps, water to water heat pumps. I think we'll start seeing more with the heat recovery type heat pumps, such as sewer thermal. There is an exception in there that's been put in as well for district energy. So if we've got an existing district energy system, something like Seattle Steam in another jurisdiction, then that would be allowed so long as it's existing before this starts going on. Electric resistance, it's still going to be allowed for backup heating, and there is exceptions that's going to be in the code for limited use of electric resistance for small areas of the building. But what are the impacts? Well, just like we're seeing in Seattle right now, it means there's going to be more space required, more equipment, more expensive equipment. And so we're going to be taking more space, indoors or outdoors, probably about double the square footage that you'd see for a traditional boiler system. So unfortunately, it means I'm coming for your parking spots or your, rooftop amenity. Sorry, folks. I do want to put out a quick note as well. So, this option two, even if it's not adopted, there are a number of jurisdictions around the state, such as Seattle, Shoreline, and there's others that are looking at it right now, They're looking to adopt similar legislation on the local level. So if the option 2 is not adopted statewide, we may see a little bit of a patchwork in what jurisdictions are going to require heat pumps, or there may be a little bit of a patchwork as to when such requirements go into place if the option 2 is taken in. Go ahead, next slide. All right. So a couple of other fairly significant changes we wanted to highlight. Again, we're taking a lot of Seattle rules statewide. So big one is the insulation on piping. One of the favorites that came up out of Seattle in 2018 was the requirement for an additional 1 inch of insulation on hot water supply or return piping beyond what's required in the code tables. That is being proposed to be taken statewide now. So unfortunately, we're going to have to, look at that extra space is going to be needed in ceilings and potentially walls. Another one is storage tanks. So right now, per table C404.2, you have to have minimum 12.5 R12.5 on your domestic hot water storage tanks. There's a proposal here that is for every 10 degrees of storage temperature above 130, you would have to add R2 insulation to the tank. So for example, if you're storing at 140, you'd have to have an additional R2 insulation beyond what's required by code. Next slide. So it's just kind of a recap here as well. We've talked about a couple of these. There's some more, high level items that are going on to the plumbing. We're going to be sending out these slides. We'll let people take a look at them. So next up is going to be Andy, and I'll ask the question for her. So Andy, are outcome-based energy codes the only option for energy code compliance now?
Stephen. Andy Burnham, I'm the manager of our energy services group here at Rushing. We've still got 2 typical code compliance pathways, prescriptive and energy modeling. So we still have the same overall kind of compliance pathways, but there's a number of pretty significant changes to how those sections are set up in the requirements. So C406 is the prescriptive additional efficiency credits section. That's gotten incrementally more complex, but also incrementally more flexible. In that 2015, it used to be you pick 2 credits off the list and they apply to your building and you're done. What we've seen in this last 2018 code cycle that we're currently in, we now do this area weighted average calculation, and we have to get to 6 or 8 credits for state and Seattle. And what's new is we're kind of throwing that point system out the window and going to a carbon metric where PNNL has done a whole energy modeling study to benchmark these credits to actual savings numbers. And then you have to get a different number of points based on your building type, same area weighted calculation. So it's a significantly more complex calculation. But as we'll see on the next slide coming up, there's also way more credits to pick from. What else is new is we've added a second C406 package for load management credit. When Nate was talking a little bit about the district energy proposals looking beyond building footprints, that's a little bit of a trend within this 2021 batch of proposals, thinking beyond just building footprints and neighborhood connectivity, thinking about grid management, load connections, those sorts of things. So now there's 2 C406 credits we have to achieve. They're based on carbon, but there's also many more options to pick from. You can see we've got 31 different credits. 2018 version, I think we've maybe got 12. And then for this load management credits, we've got 7 to pick from there. C407, the energy modeling requirements, some other pretty big changes there as well. We had some major 2018 modifications, so that's all carrying forward. We're still doing the 90.1 static baseline approach. What's new is we've increased the stringency on the building performance factors by 10%. That's in line with what Seattle's amended for 2018. That building performance factor only applies to regulated energy uses in buildings, so lighting, fans, major equipment. What's new is similar, we're adding a second metric. So we still have to do that building performance factor compliance, we now also have to show compliance with an overall site energy metric that accounts for both the regulated and unregulated energy. So that's including plug loads, server equipment, all of that type of thing. And that metric is not related to here's a target set for your building type. It's tied to just the straight mandated legislation of we need to achieve the 70% reduction by 2030. And it does allow for offsets with either offsite renewable energy credits. So that's a new layer of complexity to the energy modeling pathway. We're going to jump into some electrical changes next. So Nick Rich, can you tell us about on-site PV requirements for projects?
Thanks, Andy, and hello, everyone. I'm Nick Rich, and I manage our electrical team here at Rushing. And boy, the answer to that question is yes, a qualified yes. The PV requirements are increasing significantly, but to help facilitate something that's workable, there are opportunities to offset the requirements. So you see here the significant uptick is for mandatory renewables of 0.5 watt per square foot, which is a doubling of the previous requirement. Mitigating impacts on that, there are opportunities for on-site versus off-site, some trade-offs. And there's some energy factors. So comparing on-site to off-site, there are energy metrics that you can see in the table here to the right. If you can read those, it's not quite a one-to-one, but there's some adjustment factors if you want to pursue trade-offs with RECs for off-site PV. Focus for solar readiness, that's actually required for all new non-residential buildings of 20 stories or less. And if we go to the next slide, we can kind of illustrate what does this mean to us. I want to advance the slide here. There we go. So the quick answer, kind of looking at two different project types, looking at a sample mid-rise, the uptick in the on-site renewable is pretty noticeable on the roof. Just this is kind of a sample mid-rise. We kind of genericized, giving you some rough square foot areas of the conditioned space for the building. You can see with the new code, we're looking at about roughly 75% of typical roof coverage if you look at the C411 renewable plus the solar ready. What does that do for our high-rise buildings? That's even a taller challenge. And you can see just the metrics are large enough to the point where it can be impractical given the size, the square footage of the building, compared to the roof area. So there, most likely, not absolutely, but likely, we would basically look at exceptions in the code that most likely would drive us to no on-site PV. Probably the primary exception is where we've got 80% of the roof area. It's covered by, say, a combination of our mechanical equipment, planted or vegetated areas, skylights, occupied roof decks, that sort of thing, where that's basically taking up a big portion of our roof area.
And I want to pop in and just that is kind of an interesting exception that is included. There's also an exception for if 50% of your roof is shaded, for example. So there's some practicality exceptions built into the current proposed language. But just as a reminder, you may still need to do some sort of either on-site component or look into an off-site REX exception, again, tying back to that C407 new metric. So this is just to satisfy the C411 requirements, but just a quick reminder that that doesn't mean projects might be totally off the hook, and it does need a holistic review of what else is at play here. To kind of come to that final decision.
So electrically, probably the second or maybe even the first most significant question we're asked is what's happening with electrical vehicle charging in our buildings? What's the requirement? And we saw a ratcheting up in the state of Washington from the 2015 cycle to the 2018. So for this new code cycle, we're actually seeing a ratcheting up and a much needed clarification of the wording in the code to make it more easily interpreted. Probably the most noticeable significant increase in requirements you can see is in this table here. It's nice. We'll have this table that helps organize things and provide some better definition. Now, instead of looking at a 10% EV ready, which is still, not a full commitment to putting EV in your building, but just getting pathways, now the requirement is 10% of our buildings' parking spaces to have charging stations. And the definition is the level 2. So like the overnight parking or the short-term office parking, that type level 2 charging 40 amp 208 volt chargers, not just ready any longer. In addition, then we have a new definition in the code called the EV capable parking spaces, which basically requires an additional 10-foot preparatory, meaning conduit panels load capacity for future EV. One interesting aspect, if you're interested in looking at single family in this table, that's a new addition to the code, the requirement to have EV-ready parking spaces for new dwelling units, something that the state's been pushing for a long time. You can see in the type, the other R2, I apologize, I keep going back, the bottom part of this chart. In addition to the 10% of chargers, the EV ready spaces now is upticked to 25%, so an additional 15%. And then those of you who've talked with me, the code required current 20% service capacity. That goes away and is replaced by basically the 10% plus the additional 15 for our group R multifamily, to where that is the requirement. And like in the last code cycle, we can mitigate that with load management. All right. So just kind of recapping the most significant changes electrically, in addition to the on-site or off-site PV and then the EV charging, couple interesting things, kind of things we've started to see in Seattle. We were talking about, what about natural gas and what's happening with that? And to facilitate future electrification, now we're required to put the 40 amp receptacle for electric or induction ranges, even if we have gas ranges. And then just for residential properties, we're looking at a requirement for similar for dryer and hot water as well. All right, we talk electrical. There's so much fascinating on the electrical, the lighting part of that. So does every interior luminaire require an occupancy sensor? It seems like we're moving that direction. And with that, I'll turn over to Emily.
Hi, thanks, Nick. I'm Emily Carrasco, Director of Lighting Design here at Rushing, also a principal here. Before I answer that question, I just want to remind everyone there's been a lot of information here, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will address it towards the end of this session. So just a reminder, I think we saw one come through, but if there's more questions, please put them in there. Okay, so does every light fixture require an occupancy sensor? The answer to that technically is no. However, the code is moving forward to pretty much every light fixture in the interior does need to have some form of automatic control, whether that be an aux sensor or a time switch. That's been a trend in past code cycles to, with very few exceptions, to include less and less fixtures that can remain on 24 hours. Corridor lighting is one of the last items that was previously in some exceptions that is now requiring occupancy sensor controls. So that's a new thing it needs to dim to 50% or less after 20 minutes of vacancy. This will be an additional cost, obviously, for additional controls. Also need to consider dimming capabilities for selected luminaires in the corridors. And it's also important just to ensure that the sensor placement is going to have to be more regular in the corridors and other spaces. So that also kind of adds to the cost impact. Another change that we're seeing in 2021 is something that we saw in the 2018 Seattle, which is offices greater than 5,000 square feet require either LLLC or enhanced digital lighting controls. Both of these systems are essentially fixtures that work as independent controls. So either it has a unique identifier for each luminaire, or there is a sensor or identifier embedded into the fixture. So just different methods of controlling them independently. We bring this up here because it is just in offices, but if I had a crystal ball, I would see that being a trend for future code cycles and more spaces than just offices. So just something for you to be aware of in these types of control functions. Lots of other miscellaneous lighting changes. We have some recapped here. We can get into more of that if you want to learn more, if you want to contact our lighting team. But we'll move on to our next question. Our last question here for building envelope. Is triple pane glazing going to be the norm for highly glazed buildings, Andy?
Thanks, Emily. All right, so envelope changes, not too many significant changes in terms of the language in the proposals, but pretty potentially high significant impact. So there is still the envelope UA limit required, even if you're doing an energy model. That's a requirement that was introduced in the 2018 code cycle. That hasn't changed. It's still a 20% UA allowance. So that UA is the whole building heat loss calculation that we have to do. So we can't trade, we're limited on how much envelope performance we can trade off with our energy model. But what has changed is that the glazing U factors have gotten more stringent that the baseline compares to. What that is going to functionally do is lower down those thresholds of how achievable certain glazing percentages are without additional investment and system performance. So you can see at the bottom of the screen here, this is just anecdotally what we've been seeing on 2018 projects. You can still get up to a 35 to 40% type glazing ratio for your project with conventional good performance double pane systems, and potentially start adding additional low E coatings, triple pane glazing, getting into more exotic systems above, say, 40%. That whole scale is going to compress. So anything above 30%, you may need to start looking at upgrading your system performance and adding a second low E coating, introducing some amount of triple pane, maybe one facade or a couple floors. And then if you still want to achieve very high glazing ratios above, say, 40 or 45%, you're really going to be looking at high performance systems, triple pane, potentially looking at some fiberglass window wall components or other things to really crank down on the U factor performance of the glazing system. And it might also just functionally cap what the ceiling is, even with investing in that system performance. The other major envelope change, whole building air leakage has been in the code for many code cycles. This isn't new. 2018 did introduce the new mandatory passing the air leakage test, but it gave a little bit of fluff that you could pass up to a 0.4. That fluff is removed, and now you have to pass at the 0.25 CFM per square foot target. There's some other changes, but those are kind of the main ones. So I'm going to kick it over to Eric to tell us a little bit about existing buildings.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I know we've kind of been on rapid fire here, but we're going to quickly have a couple more slides to run through and then open it up to some questions. So existing buildings, chapter 5, if you're doing a lot of work in TIs or existing buildings, there was a lot of emphasis in code proposals around this to try to start, addressing existing buildings. And there were some attempts to get substantial alterations type of proposals similar to what Seattle has into the state code. Those were not able to get in this code cycle, but there has been a lot of rework as to clarifications of how to comply with C406. Additions having to comply with C411 and other things. So go ahead and take a look at that chapter. There's a lot of brand new code language that we just don't have time to go into today, but just want you to be aware of that. Skip to the next slide. So as we mentioned, where we are in this process, the group 2 codes, those are just starting into development. So the tags have just started meeting. I think group 2 code proposals, which include the IRC, the mechanical code, the plumbing code, and the Washington State Energy Code residential buildings, the 3 stories and less and single family homes. Those code proposals are due in April. So if you're looking to submit code proposals for that, it's just a few months away here, or a month away. And then we want to just briefly mention on refrigerant regulation changes. Those aren't covered by either the building code, the mechanical code, or the energy code. That's regulated by Department of Ecology in the state. And we have adopted requirements for next generation refrigerants for both, insulation manufacturing processes and some HVAC equipment. So, starting in 2024, chillers and air to water heat pumps need to be using in next generation refrigerants, low GWP refrigerants. So whether you're a 2018 code project or a 2021 code project, you have to comply with that based on the manufacture date of the equipment. And so make sure that you're designing accordingly right now and checking out those requirements. As mentioned earlier, we did not adopt an outcome-based energy code mandatory this code cycle. That continues to be a discussion. It's a great way to regulate the unregulated, but there still is the optional outcome-based energy code appendix in the code that did remain, though I don't know if any jurisdictions outside of Seattle have adopted that yet. And then we wanted to briefly mention the Washington Clean Buildings Act. So in the legislation in 2019, it has moved us towards how we operate the buildings and not just how we build them. So buildings, over 220,000 square feet starting in June 1, 2026 do have maximum EUIs that the buildings have to operate at. And right now, this is an energy metric, not a carbon metric. That may change in coming legislation, who knows? But, the current projects you're working on, you should be asking your designers, what is my EUIT for this project? What's my EUI target that this project is going to have to operate under the next code cycle? That should be a question you're asking your energy consultants on projects. And there is 22 legislation in Senate Bill 5722 that's going to lower this down to a 25,000 square foot building square foot requirement and extend it to the multifamily residential buildings also. So as we talked about, I think we're just going to skip this slide and move straight into questions. As we mentioned, we have about 15 months left with the 2018 codes. So we're trying to get word out that if you're trying to, grandfather your projects under the 2018 code and not build things similar to what you're building in Seattle right now for spaces outside of, or jurisdictions outside of Seattle, make sure to check those requirements with the AHJ and keep those projects moving into design to hit those targets. If you're going to provide public comments, we have another week to get those into the state. We can help direct you on how to do that. That can be showing up to the meeting next Friday and giving them, or sending in written comments to the council. So from there, does anybody have questions or things that we want to address right off the bat? I know we got one question through the chat. Yes, we'll be sharing the PowerPoint. So let's see, what's Dan's question? Penalties for continued use of natural gas. Well, obviously that's, right now we just have operational EUIs for existing buildings that we'll have to hit. The penalty may be utility bills. The cost of natural gas may change as less use as we go to all electric buildings. The replacement for natural gas is in existing buildings. There are some similar proposals, I think, for replacement equipment, as in for replacement equipment, similar to what the city of Seattle has. But yeah, we'll have to kind of check out those Chapter 5 requirements there. What other questions are out there? Is everybody able to unmute and talk now? I don't know.
Hey, I've got a question for Emily. Are there going to be reduced LPDs for Washington State Energy Code, Seattle Energy Code, based on the 2021 cycle for lighting?
Yes, there will be, and it's kind of a mixed bag of some reduction and some not. Where you're going to see the most reduction is in exterior. It's about 40% reduced. So.
Great. Thanks. I must have missed this slide. I was a little late. Perfect. Wonderful.
Well, I think we skipped a few slides for to fit everything in. Also, just to mention, Seattle has not started their process. They will probably start after April, when the code settles down a bit, and hopefully we get a solid draft out of the State Building Code Council.
The fire code, fire code did just start. We meet next week. So I think it's, yeah.
Let's see, what other questions? Has there been any discussion on the use of photovoltaic curtain wall panels? Yeah, again, the code doesn't mandate the type of renewable energy or how you do it. Whether you want to do that vertically in your building or horizontally on the roof. It's just requiring a certain amount of renewable in this 0.5 watts for the entire building square footage. And now we have this off-site versus on-site, and then the REX option. So lots of options, but this is the first time the state code is requiring renewables. There was, Seattle's had that for a while, but and so they're going pretty deep into renewables to help address that unregulated load, plug loads, lighting loads, and such, or the plug loads and other loads in the building that aren't regulated. So, what else do we have for questions here, Andy?
Yeah, let's see. I saw a question come in on how long do the RECs need to be purchased for. There is some language defining the RECs. I don't have that right offhand, but that is defined within the C411 proposal.
See, there's a question about substantial alterations in Chapter 5. That's a Seattle only requirement still. That language did not get into the state code. There were several code proposals that, it's just a really hard thing to enforce in existing buildings, and trying to find a way to write that the 150 different cities and counties in the state that enforce the code could enforce, that was enforceable, was not contained in the proposals that were submitted, so they were not accepted. Do the district energy credits require that there be a mature energy district? So the new carbon low, what is the official term? I can't even remember.
low carbon
Low
district
carbon
energy
district energy
exchange.
systems. Yes, that can be, that is not based on existing systems. I don't think we have any existing district energy systems that would probably meet that requirement right now. Maybe one in Seattle, but you know, that essentially is going to require a percentage of heat pumps, or you know, a reliable heat recovery chiller type of application for distributing district energy. And it's both, there's options for chilled water, hot water distribution, and there's another option for like a central condenser water distribution. So there's multiple paths there. So we're pretty excited about that. And you know, those definitions are, anyways, yeah, we could talk more about that later. So clarify gas for residential cooking and multifamily. Yes, there's no restriction on using natural gas specifically for cooking appliances. There is requirements that you have to have an electric receptacle to be able to switch that range. Say you had a complete range oven that was natural gas, you'd have to provide an electrical receptacle wired to be able to convert that to electric in the future. So did I miss any of the questions here?
Yeah, Eric asked, is the EV charging requirement just for building and not parking areas?
EV charging.
Yeah, for the state of Washington doesn't define surface parking as well as, say, like City of Seattle. But the code wording in the previous cycle actually was somewhat ambiguously worded to include on-site parking associated with a building, and that has not been changed, or at least I haven't seen proposals to change or clarify that yet. But the interpretation would be, it'd be that same percentage of parking that's on site associated in supporting that building.
Correct. The energy code, the energy code governs, well, this is an energy code.
That'd be building code, but yeah.
But yeah, the energy code does cover the entire site, including, you know, site lighting and everything. So yeah, that would be consistent with my understanding, is any site parking would, for a new building, would have to comply with the measures. Yeah. 15 years for Rex. You got that, Andy?
Yeah, and then I was also just going to paste in the language that defines quality of REC. So I mean, that's back to this point about, you know, there's increased flexibility in exchange for more complexity. You know, that's a big piece of it, is within these renewable energy factors, where the offsite array is located, what is the quality of the REC. Those are important pieces of, is it just a PPA versus like a community solar that you've bought into? There's all sorts of other aspects here. So more complexity, more flexibility. That's kind of been my key takeaway from a lot of these proposals. And to Eric's point, maybe someday we'll get to just the outcome-based code where there's no complexity and you just have to hit your EUI target or your carbon target, but we're not there today.
Well, if we're there in Seattle, that is an option.
It's an option in Seattle, but it's, yeah, not
required.
required, and they still make it a little harder than I personally think they should. But that's just Andy Burnham's personal.
Or it might get to a point where energy costs are just really high in the state, and then all this makes sense.
What do you think, guys? We're gonna call it? It's 1 o'clock. Let these people take their, go get some lunch or take it off. What do you think?
Yeah, did we catch everyone's questions? I'm skimming through. I think we did, but just if you have anything else, feel free to raise your hand. But otherwise, I think we've hit them all.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Yeah.
And
well done. Thank you. Very well, worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to go build a cabin off grid.
Great job, you guys. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure you get your permits for your off-grid cabin.
It won't even be on the map.
Nice to see everybody, or
Thanks for
sort
joining.
of see you, sort of see everybody.
Have a good
I
weekend.
haven't seen for a long time, or sort of see.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks.
Thanks, team.
Thanks all.